The rain was a cold, hard slap. Even for August in the high passes near Leadville, this storm had teeth, sharp with the promise of an early winter. Luke pulled his hat brim low, the oiled canvas of his slicker shedding water in steady streams. His mule, Samson, plodded ahead, ears pinned back against the driving wind, the wheels of the small supply wagon sucking at the iron-red mud. The air was thin, tasting of wet pine and ozone. He was tired of the rock, tired of the altitude, and tired of the silence that had been his only companion for 3 years. A flash of lightning split the sky, illuminating the pass in a cruel, blue-white light. In that brief instant, Luke saw something, a patch of white, stark against the dark green of pine scrub near the wagon trail. It was not a deer, not a rock. It was huddled, small, and terribly human. He reined in Samson, the mule grunting in protest. "Whoa, boy!" Luke swung down from the driver's seat, his boots sinking into the muck. He kept his hand away from the pistol on his hip, moving slowly, as if approaching a spooked colt. The wind tore at his voice, making him shout, "Hello, you there in the trees?" There was no answer, only the relentless hiss of the rain. He moved closer, pushing aside a branch. She was pressed so low to the ground he almost missed her. A young woman, her dress a thin, ruined calico that was plastered to her skin. She was shivering so violently her whole body seemed to buzz, but it was her feet that held his gaze. They were bare, dug into the cold mud, blue and raw. When she looked up, her eyes were wide and vacant, as if she had already accepted the end. "Ma'am," Luke said, keeping his voice low and steady now, pitching it beneath the wind. "You'll not last the night out here." She scrambled backward, a small, terrified sound escaping her throat. She was young, maybe 20, but fear had aged her. He held up his hands, palms open. "I'm not going to hurt you." He walked back to his wagon, keenly aware of her eyes on him. He unstrapped a heavy wool blanket and pulled a wrapped parcel from his saddlebag. He moved close enough to toss them, letting the blanket land on the wet ground a few feet from her. "There's jerky and hardtack in the paper, and a dry blanket." She stared at the offering, then back at him, her gaze flicking between his face and the woods behind her. Gauging her chances, he stood still, letting the rain soak him, letting her see he was no threat. As she shifted, her hand pushed back the tattered sleeve of her dress, on the pale skin of her wrist. Luke saw it, a small, dark mark, seared into her flesh, a stylized R. He'd seen brands like it before, in dusty saloons and end-of-the-line cattle towns. The mark of a house, a brothel. He kept his face neutral, though a cold knot tightened in his gut. "I'm just a prospector," he said quietly. "Moving east. You can ride in the wagon bed, under the canvas. It's dry." She watched him for another long minute, the shivers racking her frame. She looked at the blanket, then at the sky, which promised nothing but more misery. The choice was the storm or the stranger. The storm was a sure death. The stranger was a gamble. Finally, she lunged, snatching the blanket and the food. She wrapped the wool around her shoulders, her movements stiff and pained. "Where are you bound?" Her voice was a cracked whisper, raw from disuse. "Away from the mines, heading south first, then east." She hesitated, her teeth chattering. I need to get to Silver Creek." He nodded. "That's south. It's on my way." He turned his back to her, a deliberate show of trust, and walked to the front of the wagon. "You can climb in the back. I won't bother you." He heard her scramble in, the sound of her small weight shifting the boards. He didn't look back. He clicked his tongue for Samson, and the wagon groaned back into motion. For the rest of the day, he drove. He didn't speak, and neither did she. From the wagon bed, she watched him. She watched how he handled the mule, his hands gentle on the reins, his voice a low rumble when he calmed the animal on a slick patch of trail. He moved with a heavy, deliberate slowness, a man who carried more than the pack on his back. When the gray afternoon faded into a wet, starless night, he stopped. He found a small overhang of rock that offered meager shelter. He built a fire, coaxing a flame from damp kindling with patient hands. He heated a can of beans and handed it back to her without looking under the canvas. She took it, her fingers brushing his. They were cold as ice. Clara, though he did not know her name, ate the beans with a small, bent spoon, hidden in the darkness of the wagon. She watched him. He ate his own share, then sat by the fire, cleaning his rifle, his movements methodical. He checked on Samson, rubbing the mule's nose and giving it a precious half-apple from his stores. Then he rolled out his bedroll. Clara held her breath, her heart hammering. But he didn't spread it by the fire. He didn't even spread it under the wagon. He spread it on the damp ground near the front wheel, exposed to the elements, his back to her. He sat, his rifle resting across his knees, and pulled his hat down over his eyes. He slept, or pretended to, in the cold rain, leaving her the wagon, the fire, and the safety of the dark. Clara stared at his broad back, a dark shape against the gloom. Men didn't do that. They took the dry spots. They took the warmth. They took what they wanted. This man, he was different, but her fear, ingrained and sharp, told her it was a trick. It was always a trick. She closed her eyes, and the rain on the canvas became the sound of Madame Rourke's long fingernails tapping on the warped wood of the saloon piano. She was back in the wagon, but not this one. It was the garish, red-painted wagon of Rourke's traveling emporium. A rolling cage. Madame Rourke had found her in an orphanage, promising respectable work as a serving girl. The work was serving whiskey, dodging the hands of rough, dirty men, and smiling until her face ached. She was the bait. Madame Rourke called her the untouched dove, a prize kept in a gilded cage while the other girls, worn and tired, serviced the miners and cowhands. "You are special, Clara," the madam would coo, her fingers pinching Clara's cheek, her perfume thick and sour. "You are not for these grimy fools. You are for a man of means. Your virginity, my dear, will fetch $1,000. Clara scrubbed floors, washed linens heavy with the smell of sin, and kept her eyes down. She survived on silence and invisibility, hoarding the small hope that she could buy her own freedom. But her time had run out. A cattle baron, rich and brutal, was coming from Denver. He had seen her. He had won her. She had heard the other girls whispering, their voices a mix of pity and envy. She had known she could not bear it. She could not let that be her beginning. So she had run, in the middle of the night, with nothing but the thin calico dress she wore. She ran. She ran until her feet bled. Ran until the high-altitude air tore at her lungs. Ran until the mountains swallowed her. Ran until the storm found her. Ran until he did. Out in the rain. Luke wasn't sleeping either. The cold dampness seeped into his bones, and with it came the memories. The rain sounded like shovelfuls of wet earth hitting a pine box. He'd been a soldier once, fighting for a cause he no longer understood. The war had left him with a bitter taste and a body full of scars. He'd come home to Texas to find his small ranch gone, swallowed by bigger men with slick lawyers and political connections. He had come home to his wife, Abigail. Abigail. Her name was a prayer he no longer said. She had hair the color of corn silk and a spirit tougher than his. She had held the ranch together while he was gone, but the land was hard, and childbirth was harder. He had made it back, but only just. He arrived in time to see her face, pale and exhausted, and to hold the small, stillborn daughter who had taken Abigail with her. He buried them both on the same day, under the only tree on their property. He sold what was left for pennies and walked away. He'd been walking ever since, prospecting for gold he didn't want, looking for something he couldn't name, looking, maybe, for a hole deep enough to climb into and pull the darkness in after him. The girl in the wagon. She had the same look he saw in the mirror each morning, the look of someone already buried. The next morning, the world was washed clean and bright, the storm having moved east, but the rain had left its mark. The creek they needed to cross had swollen into a fast, churning river, the water the color of chocolate and foam. Luke studied the current. "It's high," he said, his voice loud enough for her to hear from the wagon. "But we can't wait. It'll only get worse when the snowmelt joins it." She was watching him, her face pale. She had braided her hair. A futile attempt at order. "Stay in the wagon," he commanded. "Hold tight. Samson knows the ford." He led the mule into the water. The current was strong, pushing at the wagon. The sound of the water a deafening roar. Samson stumbled, and the wagon lurched. Clara let out a small, sharp cry. "Stay centered," Luke yelled, his own feet slipping on the slick rocks. They were halfway across when the front wheel hit a submerged log. The wagon tilted violently, the angle too steep. Clara lost her grip. She was thrown from the back, a blur of calico and terror, falling sideways into the churning, icy water. She didn't have time to scream. The cold stole her breath. But Luke moved. He moved with a speed that belied his heavy frame, lunging through the waist-deep water. He grabbed her, his arm locking around her waist like a steel band, hauling her up and back against his chest. It was the first time they had truly touched. She was all sharp angles and trembling bone, soaked to the skin. He was solid, impossibly warm, smelling of wet wool, leather, and the clean, sharp scent of the piney woods. She felt the hard muscle of his chest, the strength in his arm that held her safe from the river. She felt his breath, hot on her neck, and she flinched. It was not a small movement. It was a violent, full-bodied recoil. A gasp tore from her throat, and her hands flew up, pushing against his chest. Her fingers clawed. It was the pure, animal terror of a cornered animal, expecting the blow, the violation. Luke let go of her instantly, as if her skin had burned him. He stepped back, the current tugging at him, his face a mask. "My apologies, ma'am," he said, his voice flat. He turned from her, grabbing Samson's harness, his shoulders set and broad as he fought the river and the wagon to the opposite bank. Clara scrambled after him, wet, shaking, and sick with a shame she couldn't understand. He hadn't hurt her. He had saved her, and she had looked at him like he was one of them. They made camp early, in a shallow cave carved into the canyon wall. The air was frigid now, the sun dipping behind the peaks. Luke built a fire, its small light pushing back the shadows. "We need to get out of those clothes," he said, his back to her. "You'll catch your death." He didn't look at her. He untied his bedroll and pulled out his spare wool blanket, tossing it to her. "For privacy, hang your things by the fire." He turned his back, walking to the mouth of the cave to stare out at the new, dark country. Clara, her fingers numb, fumbled with the tiny, wet buttons of her dress. She undressed behind the blanket he'd given her, her skin goose flesh. She wrapped the thick, dry wool around her, and it smelled of him, of smoke and leather. She hung her thin dress and shift on a rock near the fire. He did the same, his movements economical. He shucked his wet shirt. Clara couldn't help but look. His back was a map of old pains, white lines crisscrossing his shoulders. But his chest, when he turned to add wood to the fire, was worse, puckered, angry scars, one high on his left shoulder, another a jagged silvery mark, just over his ribs, bullet holes, wounds from a life she couldn't imagine. They were marks, just like hers. But his were earned in battle. Hers was a mark of ownership. They sat in silence for a long time. The only sound was the crackle of the fire and the drip of water from the cave entrance. He stared into the flames, his profile hard and sad. She stared at the scars on his chest. "Does it ever stop hurting?" she asked, her voice so quiet it was almost lost to the fire. Luke looked up, his eyes meeting hers in the firelight. He thought she meant the cold, or the fall. "The marks," she clarified, gesturing vaguely at his chest, then at her own wrist, hidden in the blanket. "Does a person ever feel clean again?" He understood. His gaze was heavy. Seeing her, truly seeing her, for the first time, he saw the fear, the shame, and the tiny, branded R. He thought of the war. He thought of Abigail. He thought of the men who put marks on women. "Do men ever change?" she whispered, the question desperate. The real question she had been holding inside. Luke fed a dry piece of pine to the fire. He watched the end of it catch, glow hot, and then blacken. He took a long, slow breath. "Some don't," he said, his voice rough as gravel. "Some try." The answer hung in the air, heavy as smoke. It was not a promise. It was not a comfort. It was just the truth. Clara pulled the blanket tighter. He gave her the best spot by the fire, the one closest to the warm rock. He took the cold spot by the cave's mouth, a silent guardian. Sleep would not come. Not for her. She lay stiff, listening to the night sounds of the canyon, every snap of a twig making her jump. Luke didn't sleep either. He sat with his back against the stone, his rifle resting on his knees. He was a man accustomed to vigils. In the deepest part of the night, when the fire had burned down to glowing red embers and the world was silent and cold, he heard it, a small sound, almost nothing, a hitch in her breathing, then another. She was crying. She cried without a sound, her shoulders shaking under the wool blanket, a quiet, desperate weeping for all the things she had lost, and all the things she was afraid she would never find. Luke stayed perfectly still. He did not move. He did not speak. He just sat and listened and bore witness as the stars wheeled slowly over the dark, empty land. They left the river behind, climbing into the high country. The air grew thinner, cleaner. The landscape changed from dark, wet rock to wide meadows of aspen trees, their leaves whispering in the dry. Steady wind. The world felt bigger up here, the sky a deeper, more unforgiving blue. With the change in the land, a change came over the girl. The hunted look in her eyes began to fade, replaced by a sharp, watchful quiet. She had been a passenger, a piece of cargo. Now she became a partner. It started small. On the third morning after the river, Luke was gathering wood for the breakfast fire when he smelled coffee. He turned. She had taken the pot and the grounds from the supply box and was already heating water. She didn't look at him, but she had moved his tin cup next to hers by the fire. He said nothing, but a corner of his mouth twitched. He just poured his coffee and sat. That evening, she took over the cooking. He usually made a flat, serviceable meal of bacon and beans. She, however, moved with a quiet efficiency. She found wild onions near a game trail and dug up some roots she seemed to recognize. She mixed them into the beans with a little extra salt pork. And the meal was not just food, but comfort. As she cooked, she hummed. It was a low, tuneless sound, the kind a person makes when they are lost in a task. She stopped abruptly when she caught him watching, her cheeks flushing. But the silence had been broken. That night, the fire crackled, a bright point of warmth in the vast, starry cold. "You never asked my name," she said, her voice soft. Luke poked the fire with a stick, sending a shower of sparks into the darkness. "Figured it wasn't mine to ask. You were running from a name." "They called me Dove at that place," she said, her voice laced with a bitterness that made her sound older. "It wasn't my name. It was just a label." "For what they wanted to sell?" He nodded, saying nothing, letting her fill the silence. "My mother's name was Mary," she continued, staring into the flames. "Mine is Clara." He tried the name out in his mind. Clara. It fit her. It was clean and strong, like the high country air. "Clara," he repeated, his voice a low rumble. "It's a good name." He looked at her then, his gaze direct, respectful. "I'm Luke," she nodded, as if she had already known. He felt a loosening in his own chest, a need to answer her offering with one of his own. "This land, it's beautiful, but it's greedy." She looked at him, curious. "I had a ranch," he said, the words tasting like ash. "Before the war, down in Texas. It wasn't much, but it was mine." He spoke of the red dirt, the wide open sky, the small cabin he had built with his own 2 hands. He did not speak of Abigail, or the graves. That was a hurt too deep to share. "What happened?" Clara asked. "The war," he said simply. "I came back, and it was complicated. Then the mining company came through, the new government. They said the railroad needed the land. They had papers. They had lawyers. They offered me $50 for 200 acres of prime bottomland. You didn't take it, she whispered. I told them where to go. So they came back with a bought-and-paid-for sheriff. Said I was squatting. They had a piece of paper that said my land was theirs. They call it eminent domain. They call it progress. He tossed the stick into the fire and watched it burn. Just looks like theft to me. It is, Clara said, her voice fierce. It's all theft. They sat in that shared understanding. Two people cheated by a world that took what it wanted. 2 days later, the sky turned a bruised, yellowish purple. The air became heavy and still. Storm's coming, Luke said, urging Samson forward. A bad one. It hit them not with rain, but with a sudden, violent crack of thunder that seemed to split the mountains. The wind howled, and the sky opened up. This was not a pass-through shower. It was a deluge. There! Luke yelled, pointing. A cabin! It was a small, ramshackle structure, an abandoned miner's claim, half hidden by overgrown aspen. The door was off one hinge, but the roof looked mostly intact. Luke steered Samson into the lean-to that was collapsing against the side, and they scrambled inside, hauling their packs and the food stores. The cabin was one room, empty save for a rusted stove and a broken three-legged stool, but it was dry. The storm raged outside, the wind shrieking, but inside, the world was reduced to the small, dusty space. Luke set a lantern on the floor, its single flame pushing back the shadows. He had a few candles in his pack. He lit one and stuck it in its own wax on the sill of the one small, grimy window. The light was soft, flickering. They were soaked again, and cold. They spread their blankets and ate cold jerky and the last of the hardtack. The sound of the rain on the tin roof was deafening. They stole your land, Clara said suddenly, her voice cutting through the noise of the storm. And Madame Rourke, she was going to sell me. Luke stopped chewing, his attention fixed on her. She called me her untouched dove, Clara said, the shame in her voice so thick he could almost taste it. She kept me apart from the other girls, made me serve the whiskey, made me be seen, so the men would talk, so the price would go up. She was shaking, but not from the cold. A cattle baron from Denver. He was coming for me. He paid $1,000. She looked up, her eyes bright with unshed tears in the candlelight. She was going to deliver me, like a piece of the livestock. She took a shuddering breath. But I ran, before he got there, before any of them. She met his gaze, and for the first time, he saw not just fear, but a core of steel. It ain't worth gold, she said, her voice low and hard. If I don't give it? Luke held her gaze for a long moment. He saw the terror, the violation, but beneath it, he saw the strength it took to run, the strength it took to sit here and tell him. He did not offer pity. He offered respect. He just nodded. Once. No, he said. It ain't. The storm raged all night. They sat in silence, the air thick with unspoken things. Luke watched her, and the way the candlelight softened the hard lines of her face, catching the gold in her brown hair. He noticed, not for the first time, the curve of her throat when she swallowed, and he noticed her watching him back. When she thought he wasn't looking, her eyes would linger on his hands, or his mouth, or the scars on his chest visible in the V of his shirt. Her look was no longer the skittish glance of a frightened animal. It was a woman's gaze. Curious, measuring. The next morning, the world was bright, loud with dripping water and bird song. The air was scrubbed clean. They packed the wagon and moved on. The mood between them different, more fragile. They were in a wide, open part of the trail, descending a switchback. When Luke reined in Samson, "What is it?" Clara asked. "Trouble." 2 riders sat on their horses at the bottom of the track, blocking the way. They were not prospectors. They wore their pistols tied down, and their eyes were hard and mean. Luke kept the mule moving at a slow, steady walk. His body was relaxed, his hands loose on the reins, but Clara saw his eyes. They were cold, flat, and empty. The soldier was back. As they neared, the lead rider, a man with a gray-streaked beard and tobacco stains, smiled. It was not a pleasant sight. "Morning, friend," the rider called out. "That's a fine mule." "He's serviceable," Luke replied, his voice even. He stopped the wagon 10 feet away. "Where you headed?" "East." The rider's eyes left Luke and slid to Clara. He looked at her for too long, his gaze moving over her body like a physical touch. Clara felt her skin crawl, and she resisted the urge to hide. "Pretty cargo you got there," the man said, his smile widening. "Where'd you find her?" "The lady is my wife," Luke said. His voice was like iron. The man chuckled. "Your wife, huh? She don't look too happy to be here." "She's tired," Luke said. "We've been on the trail a long time." "Is that so?" The second rider, a younger, meaner version of the first, spoke up. "We're looking for a man, an outlaw. Kinda looks like you. Maybe we get a bounty for him." "Is that right?" Luke said. "Yeah, maybe we'll just take a look at your wagon. See what else you're hiding." The lead rider started to move his horse forward. Luke's hand was a blur. It was not fast, it was just there. One moment, his hands were on the reins. The next, the Colt revolver was in his fist, cocked and aimed steady as a rock at the center of the lead rider's chest. Samson, so used to the sound of gunfire from Luke's prospecting, did not even flinch. The world went silent. "The lady," Luke said, his voice a deadly whisper, "is my wife, and I'm a deputy marshal, escorting her east to see her family." He did not look like a lawman. He looked like a killer, but his voice held a certainty that was absolute. "Now, unless you have business with the law, I suggest you move aside." Slowly, the lead rider's smile was gone. He looked at the black, unblinking eye of the Colt. He looked at Luke's face, a mask of cold granite. He saw a man who had killed before and would not hesitate to kill again. "No trouble, Marshal," the man muttered, his hands going up, palms out. "No trouble at all. We were just moving on." "Then move." The two riders backed their horses up, never taking their eyes off the pistol. They turned and, with a last hateful glance, spurred their horses into a run, disappearing back down the trail. Luke held the pistol steady until they were out of sight. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, he uncocked it and holstered it. He let out a breath he seemed to have been holding since sunrise. He was shaking, a fine tremor in his hands. He clicked his tongue, and Samson started walking again. Clara was staring at him, her heart hammering so hard she thought it would break her ribs. She had never seen anything like it. The coldness, the speed, the absolute, terrifying competence. They traveled for another hour in complete silence. Luke pulled the wagon off the trail into a grove of cottonwoods. He climbed down, his movements stiff. "You're hurt," Clara said. He looked at his hand. When he had drawn the pistol, his knuckle had smashed against the iron rail of the wagon seat. It was split open, bleeding freely. "It's nothing," he said, wiping the blood on his pants. "It's not nothing." She slid down from the wagon, her legs trembling. She went to the water barrel, soaked a strip of clean cloth, and walked up to him. "Let me." He stood still, his hand clenched into a fist. "Clara, hold still," she commanded, her voice surprisingly firm. She took his wrist. His skin was hot. She gently, so gently, unclenched his fingers. His hand was big, calloused, and stained with dirt and blood. Her own fingers were trembling, but she was methodical. She cleaned the wound, her touch light as a butterfly, wincing when he hissed as the water hit the raw flesh. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Not your fault," he said, his voice thick. She finished cleaning it and tore another strip of cloth, binding the wound tightly. Her face was close to his, her head bent. He could smell her hair, a faint, clean scent of soap and sun. He watched her, his expression unreadable. When she was done, she tied the knot. Her fingers lingered on his skin for a heartbeat. "Thank you," he said. She just nodded, unable to speak, and turned away to rebuild the fire. They made camp that night in a narrow canyon, a sliver of paradise hidden from the trail. A small stream chuckled over smooth stones, and the canyon walls were dotted with wildflowers, blue and white. The violence of the morning felt a world away. After their meal, Luke sat by the fire, mending a piece of harness. His shirt was torn from their river crossing and stained with his own blood. Clara watched him. "Your shirt," she said. "It's ruined. Give it to me. I'll wash it in the stream." He looked up, surprised. "Clara, you don't have to do that." "I want to," she said. It was true. She wanted to do something, to repay the bluff, to repay the fear he had felt on her behalf. He hesitated, then pulled the worn linen shirt over his head. He handed it to her. She took it and went to the stream, the setting sun turning the water to gold. He watched her go, then turned his back to her. Walking upstream, he knelt by the water, stripped to the waist. The scars on his back were silver in the twilight. He splashed water on his face, his chest, washing away the dust and sweat and the lingering tremor of the confrontation. Clara scrubbed the shirt against a flat, smooth rock. The cold water bit at her hands. She worked the soap into the fabric, her movements rhythmic. She glanced up. He was still at the water's edge, his back to her. She watched the play of muscles in his shoulders as he moved, the breadth of his back, the solid line of his neck. He was strong. He was not a brute, but he was a man capable of terrible, swift action. He had protected her. He had called her his wife. She felt a strange, hot curl of something in her belly. It was not fear. It was new, confusing. It made her face flush. She looked down, her heart pounding, and scrubbed the shirt with a sudden, fierce energy. That night, the fire burned low. The canyon was quiet. Clara sat, hugging her knees. "Luke? He looked up from sharpening his knife. "Do you think—" She faltered, then pushed on. "Do you think a woman can start over? Truly start over, I mean, and be someone else?" He stopped his work. He knew she was not talking about a new town, or a new name. He looked at her, his eyes clear and sad in the firelight. "I don't think you get to be someone else," he said slowly. "I think you just get to be who you are, but more." He sheathed the knife. "But it's not easy. You have to want it enough. You have to fight for it, every day." She nodded, absorbing his words. It was not the easy comfort she wanted, but it felt like the truth. He stood, picking up the coffee pot. "More coffee." She held up her tin cup. He poured the steaming black liquid. As he handed it back, his fingers brushed hers. A jolt, sharp as lightning, passed between them. They both froze. Their hands, his rough and calloused, hers small and trembling, touching at the rim of the cup. The fire crackled. The stream murmured. Neither of them moved. Neither of them pulled away. He looked at her, his eyes searching hers, and she saw a deep, aching loneliness that mirrored her own. He was the one to break the contact. He did not snatch his hand back. He just gently, deliberately, released the cup into her care. His eyes held hers for 1 second longer. He gave her a small nod, then turned and went to check on Samson. He did not push. He did not ask for anything. He gave her the space. Clara sat, the hot tin cup warming her cold hands. She stared into the fire, her body humming, later, wrapped in her bedroll. She lay wide awake. She could hear his steady breathing from the other side of the fire. A comforting, solid presence. She replayed the day, the terror of the riders, the cold iron in Luke's voice, the feel of his skin as she wrapped his hand, the sight of his back in the creek, the warm, long-lasting shock of their fingers brushing. He had not flinched from her. He had not taken advantage. He had called her his wife. He had told her she could start over, if she wanted it. A feeling, hot and strange, uncurled in her belly. It was not the cold, sick fear of Madame Rourke's men. It was something else, something that belonged to her. It was a want, a longing. She was terrified of it. She whispered it to the darkness. A confession only for herself. Maybe I want it. The high country meadows gave way to steep, rocky inclines. The air grew thin and sharp, and the trail narrowed to a shelf of rock overlooking a deep, pine-choked valley. Silver Creek was at the bottom of it. 2 days' ride away. And with every step Samson took, Clara retreated deeper into herself. The humming stopped. The questions died on her lips. She stopped cooking, taking her share of jerky and hardtack with a muttered word of thanks and eating with her back to him. Staring out at the unforgiving land, Luke felt the change. He felt the ice reforming around her. He knew this quiet. It was the silence of fear, but it was no longer him she was afraid of. It was the town. It was the name Mary Sutton. "Clara," he said one evening, his voice gentle as he offered her a cup of coffee. She started, her eyes wide and haunted, as if he had woken her from a terrible dream. She took the cup, her hands trembling, but said nothing. "We don't have to go," he said quietly. "We can turn east now. No one would know." She looked at him, her throat working. "I have to," she whispered. If I don't know who she was, then I don't know who I am. I'm just that girl from the wagon, the one with the mark." He nodded, understanding. It was a grave she was seeking, but it was also a beginning. Silver Creek was not a town of hope. It was a town of desperation. It lay in the crotch of the valley, a raw, muddy street lined with false front buildings, 3 saloons, 1 general store, and a land office. The creek itself, the town's namesake, was a choked, brown slurry, poisoned by the stamp mill upstream. The sound of the mill was a constant, deafening roar, the heartbeat of the place. Clara shrank in the wagon seat, pulling the wool blanket tight around her shoulders. Though the afternoon was warm, men, hollow-eyed and stained with rock dust, stopped to stare at her. Their gazes were blunt and assessing, stripping her bare. They looked at her like the men at Rourke's. Luke's presence was a shield. He sat tall, his face a hard mask, his hand resting near his pistol. He did not look at the men. He just looked forward, his presence a clear, cold warning. He stopped Samson in front of the general store, a sign hanging crookedly that read, "Assay Office Postmaster." "Stay in the wagon," he said, his voice a low command. He swung down. Clara watched him walk inside. She felt exposed, 100 eyes on her. A man in a stained red union suit spat a stream of tobacco juice near the wagon wheel. "New stock, girl," he called out, laughing. Clara's face went white. She wanted to disappear. The wagon door banged open, and Luke was there. He wasn't looking at Clara. He was looking at the man, who was still chuckling. Luke just stood, his hand 6 inches from his gun, his eyes flat. He did not speak. He did not have to. The man's laughter died. He cleared his throat, spat again, and shambled away. Luke turned and put one boot on the wheel hub, resting his arm on the side of the wagon. "Clerk in there says there's no Sutton listed in the town registry. Says the only records they keep are for claims and purchases." Clara's hope, a tiny, fragile thing, withered. "So, nothing. But," Luke continued, his gaze steady. "He said there's a graveyard. Up on the hill, Boot Hill, he called it. Said folks mostly just put up their own markers." The stamp mill fell silent for a moment, the sudden quiet more jarring than the noise. In that quiet, Clara nodded. "We have to look." The graveyard was a windswept, desolate place. A few dozen markers, some simple wooden crosses, others jagged pieces of stone, jutted from the red earth. It overlooked the town, a silent, damning judgment. They walked. Clara's thin shoes were not made for the rocky ground. Luke offered his arm, and she took it, clinging to him. They checked every marker, every faded name. Johnson, Peterson, Smith, a half-dozen unknown. Clara was sinking, the cold wind whipping her hair across her face, stinging her eyes. It was a fool's errand. Her mother was a ghost, a name, nothing more. "Luke," she started, her voice breaking. "It's no use." "Wait," he said. He had stopped near the edge of the hill, by a cluster of gnarled, half-dead pines. There, almost hidden, was a small, flat stone, half buried in the dirt. He knelt, his hand brushing away the grit and pine needles. The carving was rough, amateur, but clear. Mary Sutton, 1862. Clara's breath left her body in a single, painful rush. It was not a name. It was a stone. It was real. This was her. This was the woman who had given her life and died in the same bloody breath. This was her beginning and her end, all in one small, cold piece of rock. She did not cry out. She simply collapsed. Her legs gave way, and she folded. Luke was there. He caught her before she hit the ground, his arm locking around her waist, pulling her against his chest. He held her, and she broke. The sobs that tore from her were not the quiet, hidden tears of the cave. They were a lifetime of grief, of loneliness, of rage. She wept for the mother she never knew, for the life she was forced into, for the brand on her wrist, for the cold, empty future she saw. She hammered her fists against his chest, a weak, frantic drumming. "It's not fair," she gasped, her voice raw. "It's not fair." Luke did not shush her. He did not offer empty words. He just held her. He held her tight, anchoring her to the world, his big, solid body taking the force of her grief, his hand stroking her hair. "I know," he rumbled, his voice thick. "I know. I've got you. Clara, I've got you." He let her cry until she was empty, until she was just a trembling weight in his arms. He held her for a long time after that, just staring out at the poisoned valley, his jaw set. "Pardon me." The voice was thin, but strong. Luke turned, his body still shielding Clara. An older woman stood there, a small basket in her hand. She was wiry, her face a roadmap of sun and sorrow, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. She was looking at the stone, then at Clara, her eyes sharp but not unkind. "I come up here to bring flowers," the woman said, gesturing to a nearby cross. "My boy, diphtheria in 78. She looked back at Clara, who was wiping her face, her body still shaking. "You're crying for Mary." It was a statement, not a question. Clara pulled away from Luke, though she kept one hand on his arm for balance. You knew her?" The woman's face softened. "I did. I'm Mrs. Dunley. I was the one I was with her. When she gestured to the grave. "When you were born." Clara's hand flew to her mouth. She was a good girl. Mary." "Mrs. Dunley said, her eyes distant. "Came here from back east. Boston. I think. She'd had schooling, but she had no people, no money. She tried to get work as a teacher, but the board wouldn't have a single woman. She tried sewing, but it's a hard town for a woman alone." Was she one of them?" Clara whispered, her shame returning, hot and acidic. "Like, in the saloons?" Mrs. Dunley's eyes flashed with anger. "No, she was not. She was a good girl. She worked for me, in my boarding house. She scrubbed floors. She was saving to go to Denver." Her face clouded. "Then that smooth-talking man from the assay office, he promised her things. A ring, a life. He left her. Soon as he knew you were coming. Went to California. They said..." Mrs. Dunley looked at the grave. "She died of a fever 3 days after you were born. She was so weak. But she held you. Oh, she held you. She said, her name is Clara. Tell her I tried. I had no money, no way to feed a baby. I sent you to the orphanage in Denver. I prayed you'd find a good life. She came west to escape poverty," Clara said, her voice numb, repeating the words as if to learn them. "Not shame. Poverty's a deep enough shame for most..." "Mrs." Dunley said curtly. She looked at Luke, then at Clara. She saw his hand, his bandaged, cut hand, resting protectively on Clara's back. She saw the way he looked at her, and the way she leaned into him. "You're not staying in that hotel," she said. "It's a flea pit. You'll stay with me. I have a spare room and a small cot in the barn room for him. Luke met her gaze. We'd be grateful, ma'am. We don't want to be a burden. It's no burden, Mrs. Dunley said, turning. It's the least I can do for Mary's girl. Mrs. Dunley's boarding house was small, but it was clean. It smelled of yeast, soap, and wood smoke. It was the first real home Clara had ever been in. Mrs. Dunley gave her a room under the eaves, with a soft quilt and a clean white pitcher and bowl. She gave Luke the room off the barn, a small, dry space with a cot. Clara sat on the bed, her hands folded. Her mother wasn't a whore. Her mother was a girl who had been lied to, who had been abandoned, a girl who had tried, for the first time. Clara felt a thread of connection, a line back to someone. That afternoon, she saw Luke in the yard. Mrs. Dunley's barn door was hanging by one hinge, the one Luke had noticed when they arrived. Now, he was fixing it. Clara stood by the kitchen window, drying a plate, and watched him. He had taken off his gun belt. His suspenders were looped over his worn trousers. He worked with a quiet, patient focus. He was not a carpenter, she could tell, but he was methodical. He examined the broken wood, retrieved tools from his own wagon, and set about mending the frame. He cut a new piece of wood to brace the old, his movements economical and sure. He didn't rush. He didn't curse when a piece didn't fit. He just measured it again and shaved it down until it did. He was restoring something that was broken, making it useful again. He finished as the sun was setting, painting the valley in shades of orange and purple. He swung the door. It moved smoothly, closing with a soft, solid thunk. He nodded, satisfied, and began cleaning his tools. Clara walked out onto the porch, the dry plate in her hand. He looked up, wiping his hands on a rag. "The door," she said, her voice soft. "It's solid." He just nodded. "It'll hold." She looked at the mended door, then at him. His face was streaked with sweat and sawdust. His hair was damp. "You fix things," she said, her voice catching. "You fix things, like they're worth saving." His eyes met hers. The air grew thick and still. He saw the admiration in her gaze, but he also saw the deep, aching question behind it. "Can you fix me? Am I worth saving?" He did not have an answer. He just held her gaze, his own heart aching. "Everyone," he said, his voice rough, "is worth saving." Clara. That night, the house was quiet. Mrs. Dunley was asleep. Clara was in her small, clean room, but she could not sleep. She thought of her mother. She thought of Luke, in the room across the yard, separated from her by a small patch of dirt and a world of pain. He had saved her. He had protected her. He had called her his wife. He had held her while she grieved. And he fixed things, as if they were worth saving. She knew what she wanted. She had known it, deep down, since their hands brushed in the canyon. It was a terrifying, blazing certainty. She lit the candle by her bed. Her hand was not shaking. She picked it up, the small flame throwing shadows on the wall. She left her room, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor. She went through the kitchen, unlatched the back door, and stepped out into the cool, dark yard. Luke was not asleep. He was lying on the cot, his hands behind his head, staring at the ceiling, thinking of her. He heard the latch. He was on his feet, his hand on his gun. Before the door even opened, Clara stood in the doorway, framed in the pale moonlight. She held a single candle. Her hair was down, a river of brown and gold. She wore a simple white nightgown, borrowed from Mrs. Dunley. She looked like an angel, a terrified, resolute angel. "Clara," he said, his voice a raw whisper. "What is it? What's wrong?" She stepped inside, into his room. She did not speak. She crossed the small space and set the candle down on the small crate he was using as a table. The flame illuminated his face, his bare, scarred chest. He had not put his shirt back on. "Clara, you shouldn't be in here," he said, but his voice was choked. He reached for his shirt, to cover himself. "Don't," she whispered. Her gaze was fixed on his scars. She reached out, her fingers trembling, and lightly, so lightly, brushed the puckered bullet wound over his ribs. He sucked in a breath, his whole body tensing, but not from pain. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice strained. She met his eyes, her own clear and wide and full of a fear he did not understand. She took a steadying breath. "Do you want a virgin?" The question hit him like a physical blow. A look of such profound, terrible pain crossed his features that Clara flinched. He recoiled, stepping back as if she had struck him. He turned away, running a hand through his hair. "Clara, no," he said, his voice ragged. "God, no. Is that what you think this is? That you owe me something? For the ride? For the food?" He looked at her, his eyes tortured. "I am not one of them," he growled. "I am not a man who buys or takes. I am not him." "I know," she said, her voice shaking but firm. She stepped toward him, forcing him to look at her. "I know you're not." She placed her hand on his chest, on the solid, warm skin over his heart. She could feel it hammering. "That's why," she said, her voice breaking, but she pushed on. "That's why I'm here, because I want my first time to be a choice." Her eyes filled with tears, but she did not let them fall. "I don't want to be sold. I don't want to be taken. I want to give because I want to." She looked up at him, her soul bare in her eyes. "I want it to be with someone gentle, with someone who fixes things." She whispered, "I want it to be with you, Luke." He stared at her, overwhelmed. This was not payment. This was trust. A gift of trust so profound it terrified him. He saw the girl who had flinched from his touch at the river, and he saw the woman standing before him, offering him the one thing she had saved, the one thing that was truly hers. He raised a hand, his fingers shaking, and cupped her face. His thumb brushed a tear from her cheek. "Clara," he breathed, his voice breaking. You don't know what you're asking." "I know," she said, leaning into his touch. "I'm asking you to be the first. I'm asking you to be kind." He groaned, a low sound of surrender, and leaned his forehead against hers. "Kind," he whispered. "Clara, He kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of reverence. It was slow and hesitant and unbelievably tender. His lips brushed hers, soft, dry. "Asking," she gasped, her hands clinging to his arms. She kissed him back, a clumsy, innocent press of her mouth to his. He pulled back, his eyes searching hers. "You can stop," he whispered, his voice thick. "Anytime. You just say the word." She shook her head, a single, silent motion. He undressed her with a care that bordered on worship. His hands, calloused and rough, were imposing. He unbuttoned the small pearl buttons of the nightgown, his knuckles brushing her skin. She shivered, but not from cold. He pushed the gown from her shoulders, letting it fall to the floor. She stood before him, naked in the candlelight. She was beautiful. Not like the girls in the saloons, but like the new, clean country in the morning. He saw the branded R on her wrist. His face hardened for a second, a flash of pure, cold rage at the men who had done it. Then he looked at her. He saw her fear, her trust. He took a deep breath. "You are beautiful." "Clara," he said, his voice rough. He kissed her again, his mouth moving to her throat, her shoulder, tasting the clean salt of her skin. He was slow. He was deliberate. He was teaching her, with his hands and his mouth, that a man's touch did not have to mean pain. It could mean warmth. It could mean pleasure. She was nervous, her body stiff with a lifetime of fear. It's all right," he murmured against her skin. "Just trust me. Just feel." He lifted her, and she weighed almost nothing in his arms. He laid her on the cot, her body pale against his dark blankets. He stood for a moment, and in the candlelight, she saw all of him. The scars, the strength. He was a man made of mended, broken pieces, just like her. He lay beside her, not on her, propped on his elbow. He kissed her face, her eyelids, her temples. He held her, stroked her hair, and whispered to her. He whispered about the land, about the sky, about anything, his voice a low, calming rumble, until he felt the tension ease from her body. Their first time was not the fiery collision she had read about in forbidden novels. It was deeply, profoundly emotional. It was hesitant and awkward, and a little painful. She was nervous and she cried, not from pain, but from the sheer, overwhelming release of it all. Luke held her. He held her close, his arms a fortress. He guided her, his movements slow and gentle and full of a desperate, aching tenderness. He worshipped her. He kissed the brand on her wrist. He whispered her name, over and over. Like a prayer, he held her face, making her look at him. "You're with me, Clara," he whispered. "You're safe. I'm right here." And when it was over, they lay in the silence, tangled in each other's limbs, slick with sweat. The candle had burned low. His hand, big and warm, rested on her belly. Her cheek was pressed against his chest, right over his heart. She could feel it beating, strong and steady. She was not the untouched dove. She was not a virgin. She was just Clara. She raised her head, her voice a sleepy, satisfied whisper in the dark. "That was mine." Luke's arm tightened around her. He kissed the top of her head. "No one else gets to claim it." He was silent for a long moment. He felt the truth of her words settle over him. A vow made and accepted. He closed his eyes, his heart full to bursting. "No one ever will," he said, and it was a promise. The first light of dawn was a pale, gray wash in the small barn room. Luke woke with a slowness that felt foreign. His first sensation was not the familiar ache in his knees or the cold of the morning, but the warmth of the woman beside him. Clara was curled against his side, her head resting in the hollow of his shoulder, one arm slung across his chest. Her breathing was deep and even, the first true, restful sleep she'd had since he found her. He lay still, afraid to move, just watching the way the light caught the faint gold in her hair. Last night. It had been a revelation. Her trust had been a weight, one he had been terrified of. But it had also been a gift, one that had settled somewhere deep in his chest, filling a hole he had not even known was still empty. Her eyelashes fluttered, and she made a small, sleepy sound, burrowing deeper against him. Then her eyes opened. They were hazy, unfocused, and then they locked on his. A shadow of fear passed over her face, the instinctive, morning-after panic of a person used to waking up to regret. Then, seeing him, seeing the gentleness in his gaze, it melted. A slow, tentative smile touched her lips. "Morning," he gurgled, his voice rough with sleep. "Morning," she whispered. A bright, lovely blush rose from her neck, staining her cheeks. She was suddenly, shyly aware of their nakedness, of the intimacy of the small, shared space. Luke moved slowly, pushing the hair back from her face. His touch was proprietary, but gentle. "You all right?" She nodded, her smile growing. "I am." She felt new, not broken, not soiled. She felt solid. She felt like Clara. He kissed her forehead. "Good." He eased himself from the cot, pulling the blanket up to cover her. "Stay warm. I'll see about a fire. Maybe Mrs. Dunley has coffee." "Luke," she said, stopping him. He turned. "Thank you," she whispered, his eyes, full of a fierce, new tenderness, met hers. "There's nothing to thank me for, Clara." He dressed quickly and left. Clara lay there for a long minute, wrapped in his blanket, his scent, his warmth. She felt a lightness in her chest she had never known. She got up, dressed in her own clothes, and went to the main house. She found Luke at Mrs. Dunley's stove, a skillet in his hand. Mrs. Dunley was at the table, a cup of coffee in her hand, a small, knowing smile on her face. Neither of them said a word about where Luke had or had not slept. "Good morning, child," Mrs. Dunley said. "You look Rested. There's coffee in the pot. Clara poured a cup, her hand steady. The house smelled of bacon and chicory. Luke was making breakfast, moving with an easy, domestic grace that was completely at odds with the hard-bitten man she had met in the pass. He made 3 plates of bacon and eggs, and they sat at the table. Clara, sitting across from him, found herself humming, the same low, tuneless sound she'd made on the trail, but this time, when she caught him watching, she didn't stop. She just smiled. She was glowing. The fear was gone, replaced by a quiet, solid joy. It was a simple, normal moment. A man and a woman, sharing breakfast. For Clara, it was the most extraordinary thing that had ever happened to her. Their peace lasted exactly 34 minutes. The front door of the boarding house burst open, slamming against the wall. A man stood there, breathing hard. He was a young telegraph operator from town, his eyes wide with fear. "Mrs. Dunley," he panted. You got to—" 2 men pushed past him, filling the doorway, their shadows falling long and cold across the kitchen floor. They were not miners. They were hard, scarred men, wearing town clothes that looked foreign on them. They smelled of stale whiskey and horses. One was tall and thin, with a face like a hawk. The other was broad, his nose broken, a length of rope coiled at his belt. Clara saw them, and the blood drained from her face. The coffee cup slipped from her fingers, shattering on the floor, the dark liquid spreading like a stain. She knew them. The hawk-faced man was Silas, Madame Rourke's enforcer. The broad one was his brother, Tom. Well, Silas said, his voice a low, greasy drawl. He ignored Luke. He ignored Mrs. Dunley. His eyes, cold and reptilian, were fixed on Clara. "Look what we have here, the untouched dove. Flew the coop, did we? Madame Rourke is displeased." Luke was on his feet. He moved slowly, deliberately, placing himself between Clara and the 2 men. His body was relaxed, but his hands were low, near his hips. "You've made a mistake," Luke said, his voice a low rumble. "This is a private home. Get out." Silas finally looked at Luke. He assessed him, top to bottom. He saw the scars, the hard eyes, the way he stood. He saw a threat. "This ain't your business. Cowboy, we're here for the girl. She's stolen property. We got a writ." "She's not property," Luke said. "That's where you're wrong." Silas sneered. "Madame Rourke's got a bill of sale, $1,000 bill of sale. She's worth a bounty, $50, gold." "Get out," Luke repeated. The broad one, Tom, laughed. "Or what? Old man, you and the grandma gonna stop us?" Tom took a step toward Clara. Luke moved. He was not the gentle lover from the night before. He was not the calm man who had bluffed the riders on the trail. He was a different animal entirely. He crossed the kitchen in one lunge, not for his gun, but for Tom. He hit him once, a brutal, short hook to the jaw that sounded like a shovel hitting wet earth. Tom's head snapped back, and he crumpled, crashing into the table and going down in a heap. Silas, surprised, fumbled for his pistol, but he was too slow. Luke was on him. Luke didn't fight. He dismantled. He grabbed Silas's gun hand, slammed it against the door frame, and Clara heard a sharp, wet crack of bone. Silas screamed, his pistol clattering to the floor. Luke spun him around, grabbed a handful of his shirt, and threw him, bodily, through the open doorway. Silas landed in the mud of the street, screaming, his arm dangling at a useless angle. Tom was groaning, trying to get up. Luke hauled him to his feet by his collar, dragged him to the door, and threw him out on top of his brother. "Go back to Madame Rourke," Luke snarled, his voice a guttural roar. "You tell her Clara is with me. You tell her if I ever see her, or you, or any of her men again, I will burn her to the ground. Now get—" The 2 men scrambled, Tom dragging his brother, and fled down the street. The kitchen was silent. Mrs. Dunley was white as a sheet, her hand over her heart. Clara was pressed against the wall. shaking so violently she could barely stand. "Luke," she whispered. "Luke!" He turned, his chest heaving, the killing rage still in his eyes. He saw her terror, and the rage died, replaced by a deep, aching concern. "Clara, are you—" He stopped. He looked down at his side. A small, bone-handled knife was sticking out of the thick muscle of his left side, just above his hip. Tom must have had it in his hand, a last desperate move as Luke was on him. Luke looked at it, almost surprised. "Well," he said, "that's a problem." He grabbed the handle and pulled it out. It was a short, mean blade. Blood followed it, a bright, shocking red that blossomed on his shirt and began to drip onto the clean floor. "Oh, God!" Clara screamed. It was not a word. It was a sound of pure, primal agony. "Luke, no, 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 no!" He swayed, his face suddenly pale. He put a hand to his side, and it came away dark and wet. "Clara," he said, and he fell to his knees. She was across the room in an instant, falling with him, trying to catch him. "Mrs. Dunley, help me, please, he's bleeding." "I'm here, child, I'm here," Mrs. Dunley said, snapping out of her shock. "Help me get him to the table, he's a big man, quickly!" Together, they hauled him up. Luke groaned, his weight heavy on them. They got him into a chair, and he slumped forward, his head resting on the table, his blood pooling on the wood. "I've cursed you," Clara sobbed, her hands covered in his blood as she tried to press on the wound. "Oh, Luke, I've cursed you. This is my fault. They came for me. It's all my fault." She was hysterical, her voice cracking. Luke's hand, slick with his own blood, found hers. He gripped it, his fingers surprisingly strong. He lifted his head. His eyes were bleary with pain, but they were fixed on her, burning with a fierce, desperate light. "Clara," he rasped, his voice tight. "Listen to me. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Stop." His voice was a command. "You look at me." She met his gaze, her face a mask of tears and blood. "You," he panted, "are not a curse. You. He took a shuddering breath, fighting the pain. "For 3 years, I've been a ghost. I've been walking, but I've been dead. I didn't care. If I lived or died, I didn't care about anything." He squeezed her hand. "You are the only thing," he whispered, his voice full of a raw, painful truth. "That makes me want to live." A sob tore from her throat. Mrs. Dunley returned, her arms full of clean rags and a bottle of whiskey. "Stop talking, you fool," she snapped, her voice trembling but firm. "And you, child, stop crying. We have to stop this bleeding." For the next hour, they worked. Mrs. Dunley, her face set, cleaned the wound. It was deep, but it looked like it had missed anything vital. She poured whiskey into it, and Luke roared, his body arching off the chair. Clara, her face pale, held him down, her tears splashing onto his arm. They bandaged him, wrapping the cloth tight, around his torso. "He's lost a lot of blood," Mrs. Dunley said, her voice grim. "He needs to rest. We'll move him to my bed." They got him to the bed, and he passed out, his face a waxy, frightening white. Clara sat by the bed, holding his hand. For hours, she watched him breathe. She was numb. The joy of the morning was a bitter, distant memory. The terror was back, colder and sharper than before. Mrs. Dunley came in, her shawl pulled tight. "Clara, child, you need to come away from him." "I can't," Clara whispered. "No, I mean it. You need to hide. Both of you." Mrs. Dunley's eyes were dark with worry. "The telegraph boy. He was here when it happened. Word is all over town. Silas and Tom, they went to the sheriff." "The sheriff?" Clara asked, confused. "But they attacked us. This is Silver Creek, child, the sheriff, the mine, the saloons. They're all owned by the same people. Madam Rourke pays for protection. That bounty she put on you, the sheriff just doubled it. He's calling Luke an outlaw. Says he assaulted 2 upstanding citizens and resisted arrest. They're forming a posse." The world tilted. A posse. To hunt. Him? To hunt both of you. They want you, Clara. And they want him dead. Clara's blood ran cold. She looked at Luke, pale and unconscious. He had defended her. He had called her the only thing that made him want to live. And she had brought a lynch mob to his door. She knew, in that instant, what she had to do. She waited until dark. Mrs. Dunley had given Luke laudanum for the pain, and he was in a deep, unnatural sleep. Clara kissed his forehead. His skin was hot, feverish. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. She stole out of the house. She left the town, keeping to the shadows. She ran, her lungs burning, up the hill toward the graveyard. She was heading for the woods, for the pass. She would lead them away. If she was gone, they would have no reason to hunt Luke. She would give herself up if she had to, but she would not let them kill him. She made it to the edge of the woods, to the place where the pines began. She scrambled up the incline, her hands raw, her breath sobbing in her chest. "Clara!" His voice was a roar of pure agony. It stopped her, freezing her to the spot. She turned. Luke was stumbling up the hill behind her, a dark, terrible figure in the moonlight. He was clutching his side, the white bandage a stark contrast to the dark. He had one hand on a tree, holding himself up, his face a mask of pain and fury. What are you doing?" she cried, her heart breaking. "Go back! You'll tear your stitches! You'll die!" "And what are you doing?" he shouted, his voice cracking. "Running? Leaving me? After last night?" "I'm saving you!" she shrieked, tears streaming down her face. "They're coming for you, because of me! It's a posse! They'll hang you!" "I don't care!" he yelled. He took 2 steps, staggered, and fell to one knee. "Clara, don't run! Don't take away the only good thing I've found!" His voice broke. "Please!" She ran to him. She fell to her knees in the dirt in front of him, her hands grabbing his arms. "You fool!" she sobbed. "You stubborn, stupid, beautiful fool. You're bleeding." "I don't care," he panted, his head bowed, his body trembling. "I care," she cried. She saw the dark stain spreading on his bandage. "I'm trying to save you, and you won't let me." "We save each other," he said, his voice thick. He looked up, his eyes finding hers in the dark. "Or we die, but we do it together." They argued, their voices raw and desperate. On the cold hillside, they cried, their tears of fear and rage in a desperate, hopeless love. And then, their anger spent, they just fell into each other. They clung to each other, 2 broken, trembling souls, in the dirt, under a cold, indifferent moon. He held her face, his hands shaking. I'm not letting you go. Clara, I won't." He kissed her. It was not gentle. It was not tender. It was a kiss of pure, quiet desperation. It was salt and blood and fear. It was a promise. "You are mine. I am yours. Not even death." He pulled her, gently, into a hidden grove of aspens, a small clearing hidden from the path, where the moonlight was dappled and soft. He was in agony, his body on fire, but his need for her, his need to claim her, to prove they were both still alive, was stronger. He laid her down on the soft bed of pine needles. He made love to her under the stars. It was not the gentle exploration of the night before. It was raw and urgent and silent. It was a desperate, grasping affirmation of life in the faces of death. It was 2 people, cornered and hunted, clinging to the only solid thing in their world, each other. After, they lay for a long time, just breathing, his head on her belly. "We have to go," he whispered, his voice ragged. Not east. They'll expect that." "Where?" she asked, her voice numb. "South," he panted, wincing as he moved. "I have a friend. A long way south, near the territories. A rancher named Elias. He'll help us." "Can you ride?" "I have to," he said. They crept back to Mrs. Dunley's. She was frantic. her face pale. "They're at the saloon," she whispered. "Getting drunk. They'll ride at dawn." Luke, his face gray, nodded. "Samson," he said, Get my saddlebags. The medical kit." Clara ran to the barn. She packed food, the laudanum, the bandages. She packed the ammunition, and she saw, in the corner, the small bundle she had arrived with, the thin, ruined calico dress she had been wearing when Luke found her, the dress with the brand on the sleeve. She brought it back. Luke was leaning against the wagon, his breathing shallow. Mrs. Dunley was forcing water into him. "We have to go," Clara said. "Wait," Luke said. He held up a hand. He looked at the dress in her hand. "The fire," he said. "The stove." Clara understood. She went to the kitchen stove. She shoved the thin, tattered dress inside. Then she held up the sleeve, the small, branded R that had marked her as property. She held it over the open flame. It curled, smoked, and then caught fire. She watched it turn to black ash, the smell acrid and cleansing. She felt Luke's hand on her shoulder. She turned to him, her face illuminated by the fire. The tears were gone. Her eyes were clear and hard as steel. "I'm not that girl anymore," she whispered. Luke looked at her, his love for her a physical pain in his chest, brighter than the throb in his side. "You never were," he said. They fled south, leaving the high, cold mountains of Silver Creek behind, descending into the vast, unforgiving grit of the southern territories. The land was a different kind of cruel. The pines gave way to stunted juniper and endless, parched plains. The wind never stopped. It was not the high, clean wind of the peaks. It was a hot, dry wind that carried sand, stinging their eyes and filling their mouths with dust. The journey was a waking nightmare. Luke, who had been a pillar of strength, was now a liability. The wound in his side, which Mrs. Dunley had bound so tightly, was not healing. The knife had been dirty. On the third day, the fever took him. He was riding Samson, slumped over the mule's neck, his body slick with a sweat that had nothing to do with the heat. Clara walked beside him, holding him on, her face a mask of dust and terror. "Clara," he mumbled, his voice a dry rasp. "Water. Abigail, water." "I'm here, Luke," she said, her voice frantic. "Abigail isn't here. It's Clara. I'm here." He didn't seem to hear. His eyes were too bright, his skin a deathly gray beneath the grime. The bandage she had changed that morning was already soaked, and the smell was one of rot and sickness. She looked at their supplies. Half a canteen of water, a handful of dried beans, and 3 bullets left in Luke's revolver. Mrs. Dunley had given them all the laudanum, but it wasn't enough. And it only masked the pain. It didn't stop the poison. They were in a dust storm, the world reduced to a swirling, choking cloud of reddish-brown. Clara made camp in the lee of a shallow arroyo, pulling the wagon over them to create a miserable, cramped shelter. Luke was delirious, thrashing, his big body radiating a terrifying heat. Clara held the last of the water to his cracked lips. "You will not die," she whispered, her voice a fierce, ragged command. "I will not let you. Do you hear me? Luke, you are not allowed to die." He just groaned, his eyes rolling back. When the storm broke at dawn, the world was scoured and still. Luke was unconscious, his breathing shallow. Clara knew he had hours, not days. She looked south. In the distance, on the horizon, she saw a smudge of smoke, a settlement. She made her decision. She took Luke's pistol, checking its load. She took the $20 Mrs. Dunley had pressed into her hand. She ripped a clean strip from her petticoat and tied her hair back. She mounted Samson, the mule's easy gait a comfort. "I'll be back," she said to Luke's still form. "I promise." The settlement was 2 dying saloons and a trading post, crouched around a muddy water trough, as she rode in on the mule. The few men loafing on the porch of the trading post stopped talking. They stared. They saw a woman, alone, covered in dust, her hair wild, riding a mule. They saw the pistol tucked into her waistband, and they saw her face, young and pretty beneath the exhaustion. Their eyes, hungry and bored, leered. They looked at her like she was a piece of meat, dropped in the dust. Clara's stomach clenched. This was the world she knew, the world she had run from. But she was not that girl anymore. She dismounted, her back straight, and tied Samson to the rail. She did not meet their eyes, but she did not flinch from them. She walked straight past them, into the dark, cool interior of the trading post. The man behind the counter was old, with a face like dried leather. "Help you?" he grunted. "I need medicine," Clara said, her voice clear and firm. "Carbolic, and bandages, and whiskey, the good kind." The man's eyes narrowed. "Got a sick man, do you?" "I've got a husband," she said, the lie smooth. "Learned from Luke. He took a fall, a branch, pierced his side. The wound's gone bad." "That's too bad," one of the men drawled. Having followed her in, he was big, with a beer gut and a stained beard. "A pretty little thing like you, all alone out here. Your husband back at camp?" Clara ignored him. She looked at the shopkeeper. "I also need a bag of beans, coffee, and a slab of bacon. And ammunition? 44 caliber. The shopkeeper nodded. Slowly, his gaze moving to the man behind her. He'd seen this before. 44, huh? The big man said, stepping closer. Clara could smell the sour whiskey on his breath. "That's a man's gun you're carrying. Maybe you need a man to help you with it." He reached out, his thick fingers moving to touch her hair. Clara moved faster. She did not draw the pistol. She grabbed a heavy 2-pound weight from the counter and, in one smooth, practiced motion, swung it. It connected with the man's wrist, the one he was reaching with. There was a sound of impact, and the man howled, clutching his hand. "I can handle my own tools," Clara said, her voice deadly quiet. "And I don't need help from filth." The other men in the doorway, who had been ready to laugh, went silent. The shopkeeper's eyebrows went up. "God damn!" the big man snarled, his face purple, his other hand reaching for his own hip. "I wouldn't," Clara said. Luke's pistol was in her hand, cocked and aimed at the man's belly. She hadn't been fast. She had just been ready. "I am in a hurry, and I am not in a mood for company." The man froze, his eyes wide. "Get my things," Clara said to the shopkeeper, never taking her eyes off the big man. "And add a box of those cartridges, please." She backed out of the store, the pistol steady. She packed the supplies onto Samson, mounted, and rode out, the eyes of the men burning into her back. She did not look back. She did not run. She just rode, her spine rigid, until the settlement was a speck of dust behind her. She found Luke as the sun was setting. He was still breathing. She washed the wound with the carbolic and whiskey, a brutal, terrible cleansing that made him scream in his delirium. She bandaged him with clean white cloth. She forced broth, made from the bacon, down his throat. For 2 days, she fought for him. She did not sleep. She held his hand, bathed his head, and willed him to live. On the 3rd morning, the fever broke. He woke, his eyes clear for the first time in days, his face gaunt. He saw her, her face smudged with soot, her eyes red-rimmed and exhausted. She was asleep, her head resting on the wagon wheel, her hand still holding his. He was alive, and she had saved him. They were forced to hole up for another week, hiding in the arroyo while Luke regained a fraction of his strength. They were dangerously low on food when a new storm, this one of monsoonal rain, rolled in from the south. They found a barn. It was old, the roof half gone, but it was shelter. They huddled in a dry corner with Samson, the rain drumming on the old wood, lightning flashes illuminating the dark interior. Luke was sitting, his back against a support beam, his face pale but lucid. Clara was beside him, mending his shirt. The silence, stretched between the thunderclaps, was heavy. "I was so scared," Clara whispered, not looking up from her sewing. "When I rode into that town, the way they looked at me." Luke's hand found hers. "You were brave. Clara, what you did." "It wasn't that," she said, her voice catching. "It was They looked at me, and I wasn't Clara. I was just a girl, a body, the same way they looked at me at Rourke's. She finally looked at him, her eyes dark with a fear he had not seen before, not even when the bounty men came. "Luke," she said, her voice desperate, "even if we get away, even if we get to Elias, and we build a new life, it doesn't matter, does it?" "What do you mean?" "The world," she said, gesturing to the storm. "The world will always... Look at me. I'll always be the girl from the brothel. I'll always be the whore who ran, even if you love me." Her voice broke. "I'll never be clean. I'll never belong. I'll never be a real wife. I'll just be a girl like me." Her greatest fear was not death or violence. It was that she was, and always would be, untouchable, unworthy. Luke looked at her, his heart breaking. He saw her, so strong, so brave, who had faced down death and despair, who had saved his life, and who still believed she was nothing. He took her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. His gaze was fierce, burning with a truth that silenced the thunder. "I don't care about the world," he said, his voice a low, rough growl. "Look at me, Clara. Do you see the world in my eyes?" "No, but..." "I see you. I see the woman who saved my life. I see the woman who fought for her freedom. I see the woman who held me when I was grieving, and the woman I held when she was..." He pulled her closer. "I don't give a damn what the world thinks. To hell with the world." He leaned his forehead against hers. "So let them look," he whispered. "Let them talk. We'll be too busy." "Doing what?" she whispered back, tears tracking through the dust on her cheeks. "Building our own world," he said simply. "Just us." They left the barn and moved south, the land turning from brown to a faded green. They found a half-ruined adobe cabin, a remnant of some forgotten Spanish land grant. The roof was mostly intact. They decided to rest there for a few days, to let Luke gather his final strength for the last push to Elias's ranch. That night, Luke sat by the fire he had built in the crumbling fireplace, cleaning his pistol, the one Clara had used. He was quiet, his face drawn with fatigue. Clara watched him. He was still weak. He was still vulnerable. But he was alive, and he was hers. And he had looked at her as if she was the whole world. A new feeling, hot and powerful, rose in her. It was not the gentle, hesitant desire of Silver Creek. It was not the desperate, life-affirming need of the hidden grove. This was something else. It was possession. It was a hunger to prove to him that he was alive, that he was wanted. She went to him. He looked up, his eyes questioning. As she knelt in front of him, she didn't speak. She took the gun and the cleaning rag from his hands and set them aside. She put her hands on his knees, then slid them up his thighs. He tensed, his breath hitching. "Clara," he said, his voice a low warning. I'm still..." "I know," she whispered. She leaned in, her hair brushing his face, and kissed him. It was a fierce, claiming kiss. She poured all her fear, her relief, her love, her desperation into it. She demanded a response. He groaned, his hands coming up to grip her arms, his fingers digging in. He kissed her back, his own control shattering. She pushed him, gently, back against the saddle he was using as a pillow. "I want you," she whispered, her voice husky, a voice he had never heard. "I want to feel you. I want to know you're here." She was the one who undressed him, her hands, no longer trembling, moving with a sure, new knowledge. She was the one who undressed herself, her eyes never leaving his, holding him captive with her gaze. They made love on the dusty blankets by the firelight. It was urgent and raw, and more deeply connected than anything they had known. It was not a man taking a woman. It was a partnership. It was two halves of a whole, finding their balance. When he was inside her, she held his face, her body trembling with a power she had never known she possessed. "I'm not afraid of you, Luke," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. He understood. She was not afraid of his passion, his strength, or his scars. And she was not afraid of her own. "I know," he breathed, and he let himself be hers. 3 days later, they found it, Rancho Elias. It was not a ranch, so much as a small, green valley, a miracle of springs and cottonwoods. A low, sprawling adobe house sat in the center. A man came out onto the porch, a rifle in his hands. He was weathered, his face brown, his hair gray at the temples. He watched them approach. "Luke," he called, his voice wary. "Madre de Dios. Is that you?" "It's me, Elias," Luke called, his voice weak. He slid off Samson, stumbling. Elias was there, catching him. "What? What happened to you? You look like you've been through hell." "I have," Luke said, leaning on his friend. "Elias, this is Clara. We're in trouble." Elias looked at Luke, then at the girl, her face pale with exhaustion, but her eyes fierce, protective. He saw the wound, the desperation. He saw the way Luke held her hand, even as he was falling. "Get him inside," Elias said to his wife, who had appeared in the doorway. "Get water and food, and get my medicine box. They are friends. They are safe here." Elias and his wife, Sophia, took them in. Sophia, a small, kind woman, took one look at Clara, clucked her tongue, and drew her into a hug. "You are safe, Mija," she said. Elias, it turned out, was a healer. He had learned from the old ways. He cleaned Luke's wound, which had opened again on the ride, and packed it with a pungent, green leaf poultice. "You are a fool, Luke," he said, his voice warm. "But you are a lucky one. This girl, she saved your life." Luke, lying in a real bed, his hand holding Clara's, just nodded. "I know." Elias gave Luke work mending fences, work he could do as he healed. He gave Clara work in the kitchen with Sophia. For 2 weeks. It was paradise. It was peace. They ate, they slept, they healed. Elias saw the way they looked at each other, the way they moved as one. He said nothing, but he smiled. The peace shattered on a hot, still afternoon. A rider came. Not from the posse, from Madame Rourke. It was a man Luke didn't recognize, a hired gun with dead eyes. He rode in, leading 2 other men. They stopped in the yard. Elias, Luke, and Clara came out onto the porch. Elias's 2 small children hid behind Sophia's skirts. "We're looking for a man named Luke and a girl named Clara," the gunslinger said. "We're told they came this way." "They are not here," Elias said, his voice cold. The man smiled, a thin, ugly smile. "Your neighbors said different." He looked at Elias's children. "That's a nice-looking family you got there. Shame if something happened to 'em. A fire, maybe, or a misunderstanding." Elias's face went dark. Luke stepped forward. "I'm Luke," he said. "The girl is with me. Your business is with us, not with them." "That's right," the man said. "The bounty's $500 now. For you, dead. For her, alive. Madam wants her back. She wants to make an example." "You're not taking her," Luke said, his hand moving to the pistol at his hip. "I don't think you have a choice." The man and his 2 partners spread out, their hands hovering over their guns. "No," Elias said, stepping up beside Luke, his own rifle in his hand. "He has a choice. This is my land." "And you are not welcome." "So be it," the man sneered. It happened fast. The man went for his gun. Luke and Elias fired at the same time. The man went down, clutching his chest. The other 2 men opened fire. Bullets chewed the adobe, sending dust flying. Sophia screamed, pulling her children inside. "Clara, get in the house," Luke yelled, firing at one of the men who was taking cover behind a water trough. "No!" Clara yelled back. The 3rd man was flanking them, running low, trying to get to the side of the house, to the window where Sophia and the children were. Luke was pinned down. Elias was busy with the man at the trough. Clara saw it. The man raised his rifle, aiming at the window. She did not think. She grabbed the rifle Elias had left on the porch. She had watched Luke clean his. She had watched him load it. She knew how it worked. She raised it, her arms shaking, and sighted down the barrel. She put the sight on the center of the man's back. She squeezed the trigger, The recoil slammed the stock into her shoulder, knocking her backward. The sound was deafening. But the man fell. He just fell. He dropped his rifle and did not move again. The last man, seeing he was alone, turned and ran for his horse. Elias put a bullet in the dirt by his feet. "Go!" he yelled. "And do not come back!" The man scrambled onto his horse and rode away. Fast. The yard was silent. The smell of gunpowder was thick in the air. Clara was shaking, her whole body vibrating. The rifle was still in her hands. She looked at the man she had shot. He was dead. She had killed him. She dropped the rifle, and a terrible, ragged sob tore from her throat. She sank to her knees, her hands over her mouth. Luke was there in an instant. He knelt in the dust, pulling her into his arms, holding her, rocking her. "Shh, shh," he said, his own voice trembling. "It's all right. You're safe. I've got you." I killed him," she wept, her voice muffled against his chest. "Luke, I killed him." He held her tighter. He held her until the shaking stopped. He tilted her chin up, forcing her to look at him. His eyes were full of a fierce, terrible pride. "You were brave, Clara," he whispered. "You saved them. You saved me." That night, Elias came to them. He had a piece of paper in his hand. It was a marriage certificate from a nearby county, the ink still fresh. The names on it were Lucas and Clara Sutton, the justice of the peace in town. "He is a friend," Elias said simply. "He owed me a favor. He agrees. It would be better if you were man and wife. Harder to claim a wife as stolen property." Clara looked at the paper. Mrs. Clara Sutton. "He also agrees," Elias said, his eyes sad, "that you cannot stay. That man who ran, he will bring more. The sheriff in this county is an honest man, but he is one man. You must go somewhere far. California, Oregon." Luke nodded, his face grim. "We understand. And, Elias, thank you." "We are family," Elias said. He looked at Clara. "You are a good woman. Clara Sutton, you have fuerza, strength. You will be happy." Clara looked at the paper, then at Luke, man and wife. It was falsified. It was a lie, but it felt like the truest thing in the world. The dust from the shootout settled, but the silence that followed was heavier. Elias, his rifle still warm, looked at the two bodies in his yard, then at the man who had fled. He looked at Luke, bleeding again, and at Clara, shaking but with the rifle still clutched in her hands. He saw the way Luke's eyes were fixed on her, full of a desperate, fierce pride. He saw the truth. "Get him inside. Sophia," Elias said, his voice a low command. "Clara, Mia, you too." That night, after the dead were buried and the yard was clean, Elias sat with them at his kitchen table. The falsified marriage document lay between them, the ink dark on the cheap paper. "I told you that you must go," Elias said, his voice heavy. "That was to protect my family, but—" He looked at Clara, his dark eyes soft. "Today, you were my family. You took a life to protect my children." Clara flinched, but Sophia, from the stove, said, "You saved us. That is the only truth." Elias nodded, his mind made up. "The man who ran, he will not come back here. He will say he was ambushed, that this place is a fortress. He will not admit he was beaten by one man, a cripple, and a girl." He pushed the paper toward Luke. "The lie I told about the neighbors, it was a lie. No one knows you are here, and no one will. That man, he was the last of Rourke's men in this territory." He leaned forward. "You cannot go. Luke, you are not healed. Clara, you are not safe. Not alone. You will stay here." "Elias, I cannot ask you to," Luke began, his voice rough. "You did not ask." Elias interrupted. "I am telling you, there is a small adobe near the spring. It is in need of repair, but it is stone. It is safe. You will live there. You will work. When you are able, you will be my cousins from Texas, Mr. and Mrs. Sutton." Your papers say it. Now, we will make it true." And so, their life began. The first weeks were about healing. The ranch was a sanctuary, a hidden pocket of green and peace in the harsh, dry land. The world was far away. The only sounds were the wind in the cottonwoods, the lowing of cattle, and the laughter of Elias's children. Luke's body, tended by both Elias's skill and Clara's devotion, finally began to mend. The wound in his side closed, the poison leaving him. The deep, weary lines around his eyes began to fade. He was still weak, but he was no longer a ghost. He sat on the porch of their small adobe, his hands, for the first time, not on a gun, but on mending a bridle, or carving a small, wooden bird for Elias's daughter. Clara, however, was the one who truly transformed. The fear that had been her constant companion for years finally, slowly began to recede. Sophia took her in, not as a burden, but as a daughter. She taught her the rhythms of the ranch. Clara learned to cook, not just the beans and bacon of the trail, but real food. She learned to slap tortillas, her hands, at first clumsy and white, becoming sure and dusted with flour. She learned the sting of chilies, the comfort of pozole simmering on the stove. She learned to garden, her hands in the rich, dark earth, coaxing squash and corn and tomatoes from the soil. The work was hard, grounding. She would spend hours in the sun, her hair tied back, her skin turning a light, healthy brown. The brand on her wrist, now just a faded, silvery mark, was covered in the honest dirt of her new life. Elias's 2 children, Maria and Mateo, would follow her, chattering in a mix of Spanish and English. At first, she was shy with them, unsure. She had never been around children. But they were relentless in their affection. And soon she found herself, to her own surprise, humming as she weeded, the children playing at her feet. She was mending something inside, something she never thought could be fixed. One afternoon, Elias watched her from the corral. She was trying to harness Samson, and the mule, in his usual stubborn way, was not cooperating. "He is a beast of burden." "Clara," Elias called out, smiling. "Not a partner. He was my only partner for a long time," she said, finally getting the harness on. "You need a real partner," Elias said. He whistled. A ranch hand brought a small, bay mare, spirited but with gentle eyes. "She is yours. Her name is Mariposa, Butterfly. You must learn to ride. A woman of the rancho does not walk." Luke taught her. In the round pen, in the evenings. He held the lead rope. He was patient, his voice the same low, steady rumble he used to calm Samson. "Easy, Clara. Feel her move. You are not fighting her. You are dancing with her." She was afraid at first, her body stiff. But Luke's hand on her leg, his presence beside her, gave her courage. In a week, she was riding. In a month, she was flying. She would ride out, her hair undone and streaming behind her, racing the wind across the open spaces, a wild, bright laugh tearing from her throat. It was the sound of her own freedom. Luke's strength returned, and with it, his purpose. He worked alongside Elias, his body, once broken, now hard and sure. They mended fences that stretched for miles, their hammers ringing in the clear air. They broke wild horses, a dangerous, beautiful dance of respect between man and beast. Luke, who had been a man of war, found he was a man of the land. He was good with his hands. He was a builder. He and Clara fixed their small adobe. They patched the roof. They put in new glass. They built a table and 2 chairs. It was small, just 1 room. But it was theirs. Their nights. Their nights were a quiet revelation. In the high passes, their coming together had been a desperate claim. In Silver Creek, it had been a terrified, tender offering. In the hidden grove, a final, desperate affirmation. Now, it was just love. It was lying in their bed, in the dark, his hand on her belly, her head on his shoulder. It was the quiet of knowing he was there. It was the safety of his touch, a touch that asked for nothing, but gave everything. Their passion, no longer frantic, deepened. It became a slow, sure language of comfort, of knowledge, of pure, simple want. He knew her body now, and he cherished it. She knew his, and she was no longer afraid of its strength or her own. They had been at the ranch for 6 months. The seasons had turned. The land was green. A rider came from the north, a vaquero from a neighboring ranch, carrying a small, worn leather pouch. "For you, Senor Sutton," he said, handing Luke a letter. "It has been traveling for a long time." Luke took it. The postmark was from Denver. It was addressed to him. General Delivery, Santa Fe. Elias must have put the word out. His name was still on it. He looked at the return. M. Dunley. Silver Creek. His heart hammered. He found Clara in the garden, on her knees, planting. "Clara," he said, his voice quiet. She saw the letter in his hand, and the color drained from her face. What is it?" "It's from her," he said. "From Mrs. Dunley." She sat back on her heels, her hands covered in dirt. She could not bring herself to take it. You read it." He broke the wax seal. His hands, he noticed, were shaking. He unfolded the brittle paper. He read aloud, his voice steady. "Dear Mr. Luke," it began. "I hope this letter finds you and the girl. I pray you are safe. Much has changed in Silver Creek. After you left, the town went mad for a time. But your work, it was not for nothing. Marshall came from Denver, looking into the corruption. The mine company had gone too far. Our sheriff was arrested. He is in prison." Clara's hand went to her mouth. Luke continued. "As for the other matter, Madame Rourke, she stayed, thinking the law was still hers. She set up in the saloon. 2 weeks ago. There was a card game, miners drunk and angry. They said she was cheating. A fight started, a bad one. Someone overturned a lantern. The saloon, it burned. The whole building. It went up so fast. Madame Rourke got out, but she has nothing. No girls, no building. They say she fled south, to Mexico. All her papers, all her claims. They are ash. There is no bounty. There is no one to hunt you. You are free, child." Luke's voice broke on the last word. He looked at Clara. She was still frozen. Then, a single tear tracked through the dirt on her cheek. Then another. Then a small, choked sob escaped her. She did not cry with grief. She cried with a relief so profound it was painful. The final thread, the last chain that bound her to that life, was broken. It was gone. It was ash. Luke knelt in the dirt in front of her, pulling her into his arms. She wept into his shirt, her whole body shuddering. "It's over," she whispered, her voice muffled. "Oh, Luke, it's over." "It's over," he confirmed, his own eyes wet. "You're free, Clara. You are truly free." That night, he was quiet. He sat on the porch, staring at the stars, which burned like cold fire in the dark, southern sky. He was turning something over in his hand. Clara came out, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "What is it?" He was silent for a moment. "That paper," he said. "From Elias. It feels like a lie. It was for them, for the posse." "It kept us safe," she said softly. "I know," he said. "But it's not enough. Not for you." He stood and took her hand, leading her out from the porch into the middle of the yard, under the vast, open sky. "Luke, what are you—" He got down on one knee. In the dust, in the starlight, he looked up at her. He opened his hand. On his palm was a ring. It was not a store-bought ring. It was silver, wide and simple, hammered into shape. He had made it. From $2 silver Elias had given him. Working in the forge at night, in secret. It was a little rough, but it shined. "Clara," he said, his voice thick. "That paper says your name is Sutton, but I'm asking you to be my wife, not to run from anything, not to hide, but to build with me, to be my partner, to be my life." His voice cracked. "Clara, will you marry me? For real?" She was crying again, but this time she was laughing. 2. You fool, she whispered. You stubborn, beautiful fool. She sank to her knees in front of him. Yes, yes, I'll marry you. I've been your wife since you held me in the graveyard. He slipped the ring onto her finger. It was a perfect fit. They told Elias and Sophia in the morning. Sophia cried and clapped her hands. A wedding! A real wedding! They would not hear of a justice of the peace. Sophia insisted on a proper celebration, a hand fasting, under the big cottonwood tree by the spring. It was a small affair, just their family. Elias, Sophia, their children, and the vaqueros who had become Luke's brothers. Sophia had found a dress, an old one of her mother's. Simple, white cotton with lace at the cuffs. She and Clara had mended it, and it fit Clara as if it were made for her. She stood under the tree, the dappled sunlight on her face. Her hair was down, and Maria had put small, white wildflowers in it. She was barefoot in the cool, green grass, and she was smiling. It was a smile Luke had never seen, a smile of such pure, unshadowed joy that it took his breath away. Elias stood before them, his face serious but his eyes twinkling. He bound their hands together with a silk cord. Luke's vows were simple, his voice rough. I was a dead man, Clara a ghost. You brought me back. You are my heart. I am yours. Before, now, and always. Clara's voice was clear, and it did not tremble. I was a girl who was running. I thought I was worthless. You fixed me. You showed me I was worth saving. You are my home. Luke, I will be your home. Always. That night, their small cabin was filled with candlelight. They were alone. He looked at his wife. His wife. She was trembling, but not with fear, with anticipation, with a love. You're beautiful, he whispered, his hands on her waist. You're mine, she whispered back. He laughed, a low, warm sound. He led her to the bed. Their wedding night was not the tender, hesitant first time, nor the desperate, fearful joining. It was a celebration. It was slow. It was full of laughter and tenderness and a profound, bone-deep peace. He undressed her, kissing every part of her. He kissed the old scars. He kissed the faded silvery mark on her wrist, and he held it to his lips. You're mine, he whispered, his voice thick, only mine. She pulled him down, her heart overflowing. Only yours, she said. The months passed. The ranch flourished. They were Mr. and Mrs. Sutton, and no one questioned it. Their life was good. One hot afternoon, Clara was in the garden. She was weeding the tomatoes, her movements rhythmic. She stood up, her hand on her lower back, a small groan escaping her. She had been so tired, so strange, these last few weeks. She stopped. The world went silent. The sun beat down on her. She counted. She counted the days, the weeks. She counted back, to the hand fasting, to the time before. Her hand, covered in dirt, moved from her back, down, to her belly. She stood, frozen, in the garden, a look of pure, terrified, ecstatic awe on her face. She found Luke by the corral. He was working a young wild colt, his shirt dark with sweat, his muscles straining. He was beautiful. He was laughing as the horse fought him, a dance of will and strength. He saw her, and his smile faded, replaced by instant concern. He left the colt and vaulted the fence. Clara, what is it? You're pale. She could not speak. She just looked at him, her eyes wide, her hand on her stomach. Clara, you're scaring me, he said, his hands on her arms. I'm late, she whispered. He frowned. Late? Late for what? For supper? No, she said, a small, watery laugh escaping her. I'm late. He stared at her. He did not understand. And then he did. His grip on her arms loosened. His jaw went slack, his eyes, fixed on her face, filled with a look of such stunned, raw emotion that it made her heart stop. Clara, he breathed. He was thinking of Abigail, of a small, still grave in Texas, of a pain he thought would never end. He slid from her arms. He sank, slowly, to his knees in the dust. In front of her, he was a big man, a strong man, brought low. He put his hand, his calloused, dirty, horse-smelling hand, over hers, on her flat belly. He looked up at her, his eyes shining, his face completely undone. He could not speak. He just buried his face against her, his shoulders shaking. He was not grieving. He was being reborn. The sun was setting. It cast long, purple shadows across the valley, painting the sky in strokes of fiery orange and deep, soft blue. Clara stood on the porch of their cabin, their house. It was bigger now. Luke had added a room. She was round, her belly full under her dress. She watched the wild, beautiful horizon, a land that had tried to kill her and had, instead, given her a home. She whispered to the wind, her hand on her stomach. "I was never meant to be broken, and I was never meant to be alone." She heard his footsteps behind her. He came, solid and warm, and wrapped his arms around her from behind. His big hands splayed protectively over her belly, over their child. He rested his chin on her shoulder. They stood together, two mended, broken pieces, made whole. Together, they turned and walked into the house they had built with pain, fire, love, and hope. Thank you for listening to this story. We would be honored if you'd leave a comment and let us know where in the world you're listening from. Please consider subscribing to From Wild West and share your thoughts. We truly value hearing from you.